The next thing we need to discuss are payloads and droppers. So the droppers are special programs which are used to deliver your payload to the target machine. Okay. So for example, you're doing a phishing attack and you manage to convince your victim to click on a link in an email, and eventually it leads to your code being executed on the target machine. Okay, and this code is called dropper. Droppers can be very simple, like some JavaScript or PowerShell, but it can also be a compiled code like an exe program. The main function of a dropper is to deliver your main payload to the machine and execute it. Okay. And during this course, you will be learning how to code your own dropper in C language. Now, what about payload? I mean, what kind of payloads can you use? The beauty of being an ethical hacker, the penetration tester or red teamer, is that in almost all cases, it's up to you what kind of payload should you use. It can be very simple, like I said, like a PowerShell script, which does some basic reconnaissance of a local machine and it reports this information back to your control server. But on the other hand, the payload can be very sophisticated program, which, I don't know, for example, tries to install itself on a system to survive the reboot, which is called persistence. Then it performs some thorough reconnaissance on the local machine and a local network, then goes to sleep. Okay. Then after some delay, it will try to disable AV agent running on the machine, then escalate privileges and move laterally across the environment. Okay. And all this logic can be implemented in just one program. In many cases, when you perform security testing for your clients, you can use Meterpreter from Metasploit framework or Empire Beacon as your payloads. And it's really up to you and really depends on the situation you are in. Okay. During this course, for sake of simplicity, we will be using very simple payloads, basically some shellcodes, like the one launching I don't know, notepad.exe, for example. But in reality, like in real situations and real scenarios, you will be using something like Meterpreter. Now the question is where to store your payload in a dropper. Okay, and so maybe you remember from PE Primer chapter, I told you about sections in a PE file, and I told you to remember 3 section types: text, data, and resources. And the reason is these sections are a very good place to store your payload in a PE file. So to use these sections, you will have to implement your dropper code in a slightly different way. If you want to store your payload in a text section, you need to put it into one of the functions in your code, like, I don't know, for example, main function. Okay. In case of data section, you have to tell your compiler that your payload is read-only data, and the easiest way to do that is to create a global variable holding your payload. The last method is to store your payload as a resource, and as we already know, resources is a dedicated section for storing other files within PE file. Okay, so example is icons or manifest files or images. Okay, so you need to create a small file containing your payload and tell your compiler that this file should be part of the resources section. Then when your program runs, your code has to use specific API calls to reach out to resources section and extract your payload from there. Again, I know that it all sounds confusing, but when we go to see the examples, you will clearly understand the differences and what is going on under the hood.